To sync the audio, we won't clap our hands, we'll crack a whip.
Hey guys, it's Nick with the Whip Shop, and on today's video we're going to be talking about my current methods for making nylon bullwhips. Almost exactly 1 year ago, I stood in this very spot in this yard, and I did a little demonstration on an 8-foot chocolate brown bullwhip. And I figured if I'm going to do that again, it's almost the same time of year, I may as well put the same shirt on and wear the same hat, just for the fun of it. Why not? I've actually been putting this video off for quite some time in fear that you guys would just become bored because there aren't a lot of huge, groundbreaking things that I'm doing differently with my whip making, with my nylon whip making. A couple of days ago, after finishing a whip for a customer, I stopped and I thought, well, even though there's no huge, groundbreaking new things that I'm doing, there are a lot of small things. So I figured it would be fair to you as my customers, as well as you as my viewers who are whip makers, to show you what I'm doing now, differently. I would say by far the biggest change that I've made is in the material that I'm using for the whips. Instead of 550 parachute cord, I'm now using 650 parachute cord. You get a slightly larger diameter, and that really helps fill in at the transition, especially towards the end of the whip. You're less likely to get gaps, especially when you're in a 4-plat. Now, I found a fantastic place online called the Paracord store, where you can actually get 650 parachute cord coreless. Yes, that's right, the magic word, coreless. You can order parachute cord that doesn't have those inner strands in them. After spending so many years pulling the inner strands of parachute cord out and then having the luxury of not having to do that, I decided I'm never going back. If you guys are new to this channel, I would greatly appreciate it if you would reach down there and hit that subscribe button, because there's a lot more videos just like this one on the way. If these videos have been helping you make whips, you can now help me by heading over to patreon.com and giving a little bit per month, $1, $5, whatever you feel you're getting out of the channel. I'd greatly appreciate it. Today we're going to be building this 8-foot 16-plat nylon bullwhip. Now this video isn't going to be as long as the previous one. I don't want to cover things that I've already covered. So in the video you may see me point to a link in the description that takes something further. I don't want to waste your time. I just want to cover the things that I'm doing differently now. If you have any suggestions on things that I should do differently, please let me know. These are my methods. I'm not claiming that these are the only ways to make a nylon whip. It's just my method. You may have a different one, and that's okay. For my handle material, I am still using 1/4-inch steel rod. I love it. This whip is going to have a 10-inch handle, so I've actually cut an 11-inch piece of steel. And the reason I'm doing that is so that there is a place for the beginnings of each belly to accumulate. And I'm still tying knots in my strands as indicators for the middles of those strands. So you can see I've already ground down one end of that rod so that there are no sharp abrasive surfaces to potentially tear through my core material. For my core material to hold the BBs, I'm still using 3/8-inch sinker cord. The only difference now is that I'm running this 3/4 of the overall length of the whip. I'm still BB loading the core with BBs, but nowadays I'm using fewer and fewer BBs. I'm going to take my entire hank of my 3/8-inch sinker cord and I'm going to measure out about 8 inches and then an additional inch to fit over the steel rod. So there's 9 inches. I'm going to put this in the clamp and I am going to tie this off with artificial sinew, and this is my stopper so that the BBs can't go any further down the core. And tie it off. Now what I'm going to do is fill this with some BBs all the way up to 8 inches, and we're going to leave that last inch BB free. 4.5 millimeter BBs, steel. I sculpted a plastic funnel to custom fit my brass rod here, brass tubing. The brass tubing is 5 millimeters wide and it slips just fine into our 3/8-inch sinker cord. turning this on its side, and then I'm pulling that brass tubing out. And now as soon as I can feel the end of that brass tubing, I'm going to pinch it because I don't want any more BBs there. And I'm just going to pour the remaining BBs back into the, and we're going to put those away for later. There's what we're left with. We got about 8 inches filled with BBs and an additional inch of no BBs. 1/4 inch steel rod, and slide that all the way in until I'm stopped by the first BB. Putting that steel handle in the clamp. Electrical tape. This is just holding it in place for us. And we're going to come back and hit this real hard with the artificial sinew. So I'm going up about 1 inch, and then I'm coming all the way down with this tape over the core, over that BB portion. And what that's doing is it's keeping all of these BBs in line. It's also sealing them off from any moisture. Now at this point, you may have noticed that I have not yet cut this piece of 3/8 inch sinker cord off of the main hank here. I like to use this method because for me personally, it keeps me from wasting. Now I'm grabbing my artificial sinew, that hasn't changed. And what I'm doing now is I'm going to bind very tightly over this 3/8 inch sinker cord that has been fed over the top of our handle, 1 inch. And this is what's doing the actual holding. The tape is merely for tacking it on in place. So now I'm coming down. This is really tight here. Now we are reaching the area where it's just BBs. And I'm doing this little crisscross pattern here. That hasn't really changed at all. I'm going to go down several inches, about 3 inches past the actual transition, and back up again. Now coming up here is one of the first reasonably large changes that I've made to my bullwhip making method, and that is I really stress filling in this area between where the handle ends and the first BB. In other words, there's kind of a dip there. I'm not very comfortable with that, the way it's so floppy right there. So to get rid of that, really build it up, kind of filling in that ditch there that's created by the drop off. I don't want there to be a drop off there. I want it to taper. So I'm doing this by just tightly lashing this down. And that is much more secure. Check this out. Here's before, look at how wobbly it was, and here's after. If you start with the core, have your core rigid, that's going to be amplified every time you plate a belly. That's just going to make it that much more stiffer and give your whip that much more life. It's really made an improvement. This is the core. We haven't even tied on the first belly yet, and it's already nice and rigid. So I'm going up here to the top. I'm going to tie this off. I'm going to just cut this around the back. Just do a couple of half hitch knots here. Pull that through. I've taken the whip out of the clamp, and now I'm going to treat this bare steel here. I have here some hockey tape where the bare steel starts. And all this is doing is it's just applying some traction for our first belly. And now we can take our core and our handle It's still connected to that 100-foot hank of sinker cord, and I'm going to measure out 6 feet 1 inch. Our core is complete. Let's roll this thing. Alright, I've just cut my 4 strands for our first belly. Remember, the strand lengths are in the description. I cut these strands off, and what a beautiful thing to not have to gut this parachute cord. So these are the 2 longest strands here of my first belly, and I found the middles exactly. These knots indicate exactly 50%, 50%. Now the other 2 strands, the 2 shorter strands, are staggered, meaning that the knots are not exactly in the middle. If I were to take these and hold it here and go to the ends, it would be staggered a little bit, and that's to encourage the taper. First 2 strands, it doesn't matter which strands I'm starting with. Just grab 2 random strands of those first belly strands, put them through like that. Nothing's changed here. Taking my other 2 strands, I have those middles indicated by the knots, sliding those through and pulling those through until we're stopped by our middle knots. Nothing's changed there. And now I'm plaiting under 2 over 2 temporarily. But once I lock down this first belly, I'm going to start plaiting 2 strands at the same time. Alright, so this first belly is locked into place. We're going to do a little method here to expedite this handle. 2 strands at the same time, under 2 over 2. I'm just using 2 strands. And this is just going to allow us to get this handle done quicker. Under 2 over 2. I'm going to do this all the way down and stop at 1 inch above the transition. And then we'll switch back over to the single strand, because the single strand is a much more secure plaiting pattern. It's tighter. So on the handle, there's no stress like this. There's no stress on the handle. That's why we can use this, this plaiting pattern for the sake of expediting the handle. Alright, I've plaited the handle and the 2-strand side-by-side herringbone, and we are now 1 inch above the transition area. As you can see, it's right about here. So we're going to switch back to our single strand herringbone of 8 plat under 2 over 2. And once again, the reason we're switching over to the single strand is because it's a tighter pattern. It's a much more firm pattern that's going to hold this transition just that much stiffer. So I'm just going to keep on plaiting until I come up to some strands that need to be dropped. Alright, I'm coming up to the place where I need to drop a couple of strands, and I'm still using the method of dropping on the outside for both bellies. Now if you look down here, we have our sinker cord, and if you'll notice, it's quite flat, unfortunately. If I were to just keep it flat like this and braid over it and plait over it, it wouldn't be a nice round plait, especially when we get down to 4 strands towards the end. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab my artificial sinew, and I'm going to fold this in half like that. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a much more round surface to plait over. So I'm just pinching it in half. I'm going to go all the way down to the end and all the way back up. And that's going to give us, like I said, a nice round surface to plait over. And I'll show you the before and after right now. You see how round that is? As opposed to the untreated surface here, which is flat. For this last few inches, I'm just going to cut it, and I'm just going to wrap it around like this. And now we are where the tape is, where the BBs stop. The BBs stop about right here. So I'm just going to tie this off with a couple of half-hitch knots, and then we'll cut that. So now we can go ahead and drop these 2 strands. So now the strand is in position to be dropped. You'll notice that since we've wrapped the the sinker cord with the artificial sinew, it's also a little stickier and is supplying us with some traction for our parachute cord. So that hasn't changed. I'm dropping strands on bellies the same way that I used to. It is now time to take these last 4 strands and lightly bind them to the core. Not a lot has changed. I'm going to take the 2 strands on each side, pull them and fold them back alongside the core. And I'm wrapping quite loosely here. Now I'm going to start staggering the strands. The first one. And this is going to encourage the taper. Evenly wrapping those strands. So that really hasn't changed much at all. It's about 1 foot that we're allowing for all those strands to slowly fade out. And that's going to increase the taper. At this point, we're going to take all of those strands that we dropped, individually pull them, cut them and melt them. Nothing has changed here. Still using the same methods to do this. Leaving about 1 millimeter. I'm going to come back, hit these with the lighter, and then take care of the other 2 strands. Alright, I've got the whip back in the clamp, and I'm getting ready to wrap a couple of layers of this hockey tape. Now the reason that I'm not using the floor mat tape anymore for this area is because I feel like this does a better job. It keeps things a little bit thinner, diameter-wise. Sometimes after 2 bellies of the floor mat tape, things would get a little bit larger of a diameter that I felt comfortable with on a whip. So I have since pretty much committed myself to this hockey tape, and it's doing a fantastic job. Keep in mind that the hockey tape isn't adding any strength per se to the whip's structure, but more so just allowing a nice flat surface for our artificial sinew. And this is the stuff that's doing the real binding, the real stiffening. So I'm going to find about 1 inch above where the steel stops. We can tell the steel stops about right there. And I'm already really happy with this transition. There's 1 inch above. I'm going to wrap down about 8 inches of this tape. Cut it at an angle, like this. For the last couple of inches, I'm just going to wrap it with my fingers very loosely, making sure that all of the tape, every inch of it, is making contact with the parachute cord. Now, I'm going to be doing the binding with the sinew. Going to be going down and up a total of 3 times. When I'm blazing a trail, meaning that I'm going over area that has not yet seen the sinew, I'm going in a crisscross pattern like this. Just like that. And when I'm traveling over any of this sinew that has already been in place, in other words, I'm wrapping around areas I've already covered with the sinew, I'm not doing the crisscross pattern, I'm just doing one angle. And you'll see what I mean by that in just a few moments here. So whenever I'm blazing a trail of sinew, I'm using the spiral method. Not the spiral method, the crisscross method. And when I'm going back up, I'm just using a spiral. And that's all we want for our first pass going down. Now I'm going to stop here, turn around, and go back up to the top. And here's what I mean. I'm not doing the crisscross pattern on the way up. I'm just doing 45-degree spiral like this all the way to the top. And I'm filling in the spaces that I have not already been over. In other words, right in here, in between the spirals, I'm just trying to cover the entire belly with this sinew. stopping at the top, and I'm going back down. And I'm not doing the crisscross pattern once again here because I've already done it. I'm not blazing a trail of sinew here. I'm just going over where I've already been. But as soon as I reach the point of uncharted territory, when it comes to the sinew, I'm now going to transition back into the crisscross because we haven't been here yet. And this is the second pass of 3. Now I've reached the end here, and I'm going to go back up again. Now I've reached the top here. I'm going to turn around and go all the way down and all the way up for the final time. Now if you may have noticed, what I'm doing here is I'm going down a third, another third, and then the final pass will continue past the tape about 2 or 3 inches. And I'm going to go beyond the tape here. I'm starting to ease up a little bit on the tension to encourage the taper, the rigidity of that taper, something I discuss quite often on this channel, so I won't get too deep into it. So there's about 3 inches. We're going to go 4 inches past the end of the tape. And now I'm really just loosely wrapping here with my fingertips. Loosely wrapping, just let that fade right out. And now I'm going to go back up to the top, still finger tight right here, filling in the spaces I haven't been. Up to the top, getting a little bit more firm, a little more pressure on the wrapping, the binding, and up to the top we go. Really firming up there. And this is just the first belly, so we have a whole other chance to do this again with the second belly. But that doesn't mean we should skimp at all. Now I'm going to cut this and press that in. Alright, now this step is optional, but I'm going to add a little bit of Dacron here to the transition of this whip. And what the Dacron does is, because it is not waxed, it just provides a little bit more rigidity and overall life to the whip. So I'm just going to lay down a few crisscross passes of this stuff over the transition. And I'm going to be doing this on the second belly as well. Easing up on the tension a little bit and back up to the top. You can see it just adds a little bit more rigidity there to the transition. And to hold this in place, I'm grabbing some artificial sinew. I'm going to wrap it around the starting point, the finishing point of my Dacron to pinch it permanently. Now we can sniff the Dacron. I'm just going to cover up that thread there. Now I'm going to snip this and press it in to the sinew below. I can trim this off. Looks good. I'm going to be rolling this first belly momentarily, but before we do so, I'm going to lay down a layer of binding here at the end of the handle. That way, once the overlay is all said and done and we're going to be attaching our heel knot foundation, we just have a little bit more for the staples that we're going to be using to anchor the foundation, it's just going to add a little bit more meat for them to hold on to so they never come out. Going to take the whip out of the clamp and roll it. The way I'm rolling it hasn't really changed. Alrighty, I just cut my strands for my second belly of this whip. Same scenario, taking my two longest strands, and the exact middle is found by the knots. The remaining strands are staggered. So I'm going to take two random strands. So I'm going to take three random Alright, I'm going to take three random strands here. It doesn't matter. Let me punch my light while I'm at it. Okay, I'm going to take three random strands here for my selection. It doesn't matter which ones I choose. And I'm going to fix them to the back of my handle. Nothing's changed. I'm just going to do it how we've been doing it. Now I'm finding the ends. Grabbing my three remaining strands, opening up the eye and feeding them through. Pulling that closed and making sure that all those knots are around the back side in the middle. Pulling that closed, and now I'm going to slide these strands to the middles, indicated by the knots. First one. So these are all in place and ready to go. We're going to start this thing off in a single strand 12 plait herringbone. And just as we did for the first belly, we're going to transition into two strands together. Under 3 over 3. Be locking this belly down. It's always a pain, in my opinion, starting the bellies, because you have to work with the handle above the clamp, so all of your strands are going to be getting twice as tangled as they normally would. So once you work your way past the point where you can actually stick this in the clamp and you're working below the vise, things get a little easier, I think. Just my opinion. So before we cinch those strands down, I'm going to pull everything into place. That's where I want to start. So now I can go ahead and lock down the first belly. Nothing's really changed there. I'm going to do a few more passes with the single strand herringbone, just to ensure that my first belly is locked into place. Feels pretty good. Do one more strand, and then we're going to transition right into that two-strand handle plating pattern. Alright, that's rock solid. Two strands together to expedite the handle plating. Under 3 over 2. Sorry. I'm grabbing two strands around the back. Under 3 over 3. Just like that. Look at how nice and flat those strands naturally are for us. So the drill is under 3/3 with 2 strands together. We're going to do that for the whole handle, and as soon as we arrive at 1 inch above the transition, we're going to do the same thing. Switch over to our single strand herringbone. I'll meet you there. Okay, the handle plating is complete, and we have reached the point where we are 1 inch above our transition here, where the steel handle stops and the BBs begin. So we want to transition back into a single strand herringbone in 12 plat, under 3/3 on both sides. I'm going to continue this pattern, pulling very tightly over the transition, and I will be dropping strands along the way. I've been plating along, and it's time to drop the first strand of our second belly. And we're using the same exact method that we used for belly 1. Nothing's changed there. Here's the strand. Goodbye. Pointing to the upper left, around the back. Temporarily still in 6 plat for the right side, under 3/3. And on the left side, we're now under 3/2. So you can see that second strand to be dropped here is coming up quick. Then we will be in a 10 plat, even 10 plat. Under 3/2 on the left. Still under 3/3 on the right. And there's its final resting place. We are now ignoring that strand as well. We'll be giving these a big tug at the end when we're finished with this belly. But now, we're in an even plat. Under 3/2, 10 plat, all around. And I'll meet back up with you as soon as we run out of our next couple of strands. Alright, I have been plating down the whip, dropping strands along the way, and I have come to the point where we have reached the end of our sinker cord. Now remember, this ends at 6 feet 1 inch. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my next strand, this one here, and it needs to be dropped. This dropped strand I am dropping right where this core ends so that there is no visible crease there. I'll show you how I do this. So the dropped strand is going to become our new core. And I'm making sure that I do this. There we go. Making sure that I do this right where that sinker cord ends. That's going to give us the best result. Right here. I'm going to drop that one. Just like this, swing it down to the center. Now this is the new core of our whip. Now what I like to do at this point is kind of pinch those ends with my fingernails and slide it down. And I want this to be a little rounder than it is currently. Just going to pinch it and then pull it down just to make it a little bit rounder so we have a nice round surface to plate over. That looks a lot better. I'm going to continue plating. On the right side we're under 1/1. On the left side we're still under 2/1. Fairly quickly I'm going to be dropping the other strand. And that dropped strand, if you notice here, we have a little bit of a loose strand, and that is our strand that we just dropped. There we go. Tightens that up perfectly. And now, here's our other short strand that we're going to drop now. And as soon as we drop it, I'm going to be cutting the old strand here or the previous strand that became our core. Cut that at an angle. And this becomes our new core. And once again, that new core strand, I'm going to run my fingernails down it and make it a little more round. And I'm going to snip that away a little bit so we don't have any lumps. Run my fingernails down that strand and just make it a little more round so we have a round surface to plate over. There we are. And now we can continue plating. Under 1 over 1, we are currently in a 4 plat. So coming up shortly, I'm going to be showing you guys something brand new. So here is our core strand, and I'm plating down a couple of inches since our last dropped strand. And at this juncture, I'm going to take the remainder of that core strand and I'm going to snip it. Just like that. And just for a little while, we're going to be plating over nothing. About an inch. Nothing underneath here. This is just under 1 over 1 4 plat over no core. It's going to feel a little weird. I think it feels a little bit weird. So there's our inch. And now begins our twist. So to prepare this, I'm pulling all of the strands here. I'm going to take that top strand, fold it around the left side, and the top strand on the left, fold it around to the right side. This next method that you're about to see me use, I learned from a new friend named Anthony Noonley that I met out of the 2018 Los Angeles Whip Meet, and he was generous enough to share this method with me of using hemostats to twist the strands instead of your fingers, and you can keep them twisted so much more effectively and easily. As a disclaimer, I did ask Anthony for permission to use this method in this video, and he kindly granted me that permission. In return, I want to give a shout out to Anthony Noonley. I had a chance to try out some of his cow whips at the 2018 Los Angeles Whip Meet, and I was very impressed. Anthony makes some very nice whips. If you guys are interested in ordering a whip from Anthony, let me know and I will give you his contact info. Now I'm pulling these first off nice and tight here on the right side. I've got my hemostats, and I'm going to clamp a few inches down here. I'm going to be doing the same exact thing to our left side. Hemostats. Pull it tight and begin twisting. Both twisting this way, and I'm twisting to the right. And cross it over. And cross it over. And again. And now we can slowly move our way down on the strands. Inching my way down. Also, I'm going to do that for the left-hand side. Like that. And this is just the same tapered twist that you saw in one of my previous videos. Now I'd like a strand to be dropped. So I'm going to let go of this right side here. Pick my shorter strand. Let it go. And reattach my hemostat. Right there. Now because I removed the loading on the strand there, I have to wind this up again to equal tension of the left 2 strands. So now we're in 3 strands. Continuing down, I reposition myself on the left side. Wind it up. Now we're in 3 strands. Keep on spinning these and twisting them together. And now I'd like to drop a final strand. So here's the shorter one of the 2 on the right side. I'm going to let that go. Reattaching my hemostats. This time I'm going to attach the hemostat to the very end of the strand since there are no more strands to be dropped. I'm going to also do that on the left side here. Right there. If I can get it here. There we are. And wind them up again before we start spinning them together. Now these last two strands, I really want them to be wound up tightly so that they lock together. So I'm giving these a little extra here. I'm pulling outward like this, and it really locks them together well. The hemostats help hold a nice twist in the parachute cord. See that? And I like this method for ending the second belly. You could do this for the first belly as well. You could adjust the strand lengths and have them staggered on the first belly. And doing it that way, if you wanted to, you could actually have the sinker cord not extend as long as I have it. I don't really know of any other whip makers who are running their core as long as I do. And it's just because I'm used to it. Here we are. We're naturally running out of strands here. And that's exactly what I want. So I'm going to take some sinew. And I'm just going to begin wrapping it. I mean, this does a pretty good job of holding itself there. But when we go to roll the whip, I want something that's a little more substantial as far as holding this from becoming untwisted. Continuing up. Careful, don't bind that strand like that. You don't want it to be underneath your binding. Like I just did there. Look at that. Above. Work around those dropped strands like this. Up to the top. And here we can cut a little loop here, like that. And around there, like I've done earlier, through the loop. And pull those strands of our sinew. Now the only thing we have to do is go back and trim our excess strands that have been dropped. I'm also going to trim that last strand. I'm not crazy about the staggering there. It needs to be a little bit shorter. And that's a nice taper. Taking those dropped strands, going to give them one little tug and a snip. Just like that. And this is how I am ending my second bellies on my nylon whips with a tapered twist. I just like it better. It's quicker. It requires less sinew. And I think it's just a simpler method. Next, I'm going to be trimming my strands that have been dropped. Using the same method, it's going to snip them and melt them and press them into that belly. So I'm going to do that, and then we will begin the binding on this second belly. Alright, the whip is back in the clamp, and it is time to wrap another layer of our hockey tape. This time we're going to go a little under twice the distance. So again, I'm finding that transition area. I'm going to start wrapping an inch above, spiraling down. Starting to ease up just a little bit there. Once again, making sure that all of this tape is making contact with that belly underneath. Alrighty, so we have our tape secure, and I've got my artificial sinew, and we are going to basically do the same thing we did on the first belly, except this time we're going down and back. Each pass is going to be a little bit longer than the first one. Starting about an inch above the transition to begin this crisscross pattern here. And it's essentially the same thing. I'm going to be going down and up a total of 3 times. And at the end, we're going to be adding a little bit of our Dacron. And now, back up to the top, filling in the spaces that we haven't been before, like this. All the way back up to the top. So there's a third right here. We're going to go another third, and then the final pass will exceed past our tape about 6 inches, and then I'm going to go back up to the top. So I'm going to do the same thing I did for the second belly. Okay, this is my final pass that you're looking at right now. I've just gone down all the way for the 3rd time, and I'm getting ready to turn around and go back up. As you can see, I have surpassed the ending of that tape, and as I'm passing through this area, I'm starting to wrap lighter, more lightly and more lightly. Does that work? More lightly or lighter? I don't know. I'm loosening my tension as I go, and that's to encourage a tapered rigidity throughout the whip. So now, turning around, and I'm going back up to the top, and maintaining this finger light touch here, as you can see. As you can see, some of those wraps are very loose. I can move them with my finger like that. So now, back up to the top. Slowly increasing my tension as I ascend. Now I'm pulling just about maximum strength here. Back up to the top. And now I'm not going to cut this artificial sinew yet, because we're going to be using it to anchor down our Dacron. I'm just going to tie on one pass down and up, and this is just going to give the whip a little more springiness on the handle. It is not waxed, and there's no oil, so if you let go, this whole few inches that you just wrapped will become loose. It's kind of a pain. You just gotta stay on it. Wrap a little bit more loosely here. And now I'm going to turn around and go back up to the top. Just using the 45-degree angles, not doing the crisscross pattern here. Back up to the top. And now, since we did not cut our sinew, I'm going to switch hands here. And I'm going to wrap that Dacron so it does not come undone, and I'm using the grippy sinew to do this. The sinew just sticks to itself magically. Press it into the other wraps underneath. Now I can cut my Dacron, and look at this transition. Look at how springy that is. Just what we want. We're going to roll this second belly, but first, once we're building our knot foundation, we'll just have a little bit more to dig into. Alright, the whip is back in the clamp. We just rolled it. Rolling method has not changed. And it's time to attach our overlay strands. I'm going to be doing the overlay in beautiful chocolate brown. I know the lighting doesn't really make it look like chocolate brown, but take my word for it. So I'm going to cut the strands right now for my overlay. Strand lengths are in the description for the overlay. Now for this handle, I'm going to be doing some alternate patterns that kind of change throughout the handle. That's just a request from Tom. So what I do here, you obviously don't have to follow me exactly, but I am going to be doing some variations in this handle plating. And what I'm doing most of the time nowadays for my handles is I'm just doing a checkerboard pattern with 2 strands at the same time. So as you can see, I have 4 of my strands here. It doesn't matter which strands I'm tying on first. I've got my remaining strands, my remaining 4 strands, and I'm just going to find the ends of the strands. And nothing has changed here. I'm just going to open up an eye and slide those remaining 4 strands through like that and pull them closed. And we can one by one pull the strands. Like I said, nothing has changed here. This is the same method I've been using for years now. Can't believe it's been years since I started making whips. I never would have guessed 10 years ago that I would have a custom whip making company. I never would have guessed. It's so funny the things we find ourselves doing years later, and just an adventure. I like that though. I love variety, just random things like this, you know. It's because of all of you guys that I was able to actually make something out of this interest of mine, and now I'm selling custom bullwhips and snake whips around the world. And I'm very thankful for that opportunity. So here is one last strand there, is in place. Is it? Yes, it is. Good. I'm gonna just look around the back side of this thing and make sure we got all of our knots there, and we do. So I'm sliding this whole thing up to the top like I've been doing, and I'm just gonna go straight into our 2-strand diamond plait checkerboard pattern. 2 strands, under 2, over 2, under 2, over 2. Nothing's changed here, guys. This is just a standard checkerboard pattern, and I'm going to continue and kind of do some variations along the way. So plait your handle and I'll meet you above the transition. Okay, so I have plated the handle. As you can see, I just put some variations in there. We have a single strand checkerboard. We have a single strand under 2, over 2, under 2, over 2 going on here, and then back into the 2-strand checkerboard pattern that we started with. So that's the end of our handle, and I'm going to go straight into a herringbone in 16 plait under 4 over 4. So around the back, nothing's changed here. Just a standard herringbone in 16 plait, nothing new. And that's what I'm just going to keep on plating. Single strand under 4 over 4. Okay, working my way down the whip, and it is time to drop my first strand, and nothing has changed here. I'm using the same methods to drop strands, grabbing the strand to be dropped, giving it one last tug, and pulling it to the center to be dropped. Okay, I am quickly nearing the end of the core here on this whip, and I am currently in 8 plait. But momentarily I'm going to be dropping one of those 8 strands, and that will take the place and carry on this core. Alright, we're drawing very near to the end of our core as we know it. This will be the new core here. I have a strand on the right side that I'm dropping, so I'm going to get at least one strand out ahead of that one to hold it down while we're dropping it. As you can see, this is our short strand. We have one strand in front of it. So I'm going to drop it, and that's going to become our new core. I'm going to pull the dropping strand as well as the strand below it. I'm going to swing it to the middle. And I'm going to plait under 2 over 1 on the right side, and still under 2 over 2 on the left. Now once again, because this is our brand new core, I want to make this thing a little bit more round, and I'm just going to do so by pinching it, sliding my fingers down. There we go. I've rounded off that strand a little bit, and I'm going to keep on plating. Now 7 strands is obviously too much to be plating over such a small core, so I'm going to drop my other strand on the left side. One pull to the strand itself and the strand we're going to be dropping. Swing that to the middle, and at this point I'm going to cut an angle on the previously dropped strand. Here's our new dropped strand, and just as I did before, I'm going to be sliding my finger down it and just rounding it off. Now we are in 6 plat. Under 2 over 1 on the left and the right side. So continue that 6 plat. Alright, so I just took a measurement on this thing and I found that I am 1.5 foot short of finishing this whip. So at this point I'm going to drop another strand. I'm going to get one strand in front of it. Because we're in 6 plat, we don't have the luxury of being able to put 2 strands in front of it. That's just the nature of a 6 plat. So what we're going to do is give it one last pull, give the strand in front of it a pull, swing it to the middle, and that'll become the new core. I'm going to get one strand on top of it. We'll do 2 strands on top of it before we clip our previous core. Okay, we can see that's our dropped strand. And now I'm going to snip the old core. If we just left 2 of them there, it'd be bulky and our taper would start going the other way. It would start getting bigger. And we definitely don't want that to happen. And I'm just going to plate this uneven pattern here for a few rounds. And at this point, I feel comfortable dropping our other strand on the right side. And here's the core, and here's the strand that we're going to drop. So same procedure, give it a pull, give the strand in front of it a pull, swing it to the middle. And that becomes our new core. Now we are within 1 foot of the end of this whip. I always like to end, especially on an 8-foot whip, I like to end the last foot in a 4 plat. You can see there's our dropped strand, that's our new core, and then we're going to do the same thing. Cut an angle on our previous strand. If you want to, you can just melt that a little bit so it's not fraying. I find that if you melt it, another thing that I've discovered is if you melt those strands so close to the end of the whip, it creates a really kind of a rigid spot. Sometimes you'll find some creases accumulating there. Remember to round off those dropped strands that become your new cores. I'm going to go all the way down to the end of this whip in 4 plat. Alright, we have reached the end of this whip, and I've tied a fall in place here using the same methods that I used in my previous video. Nothing's changed here, guys, just tying a fall on. So I've reached my last strand here. Let me see here, let me untie this. I don't know how it got tied. So I've reached my last strand, and actually now that I think about it, there is one thing that I'm doing differently now. I'm actually going to take this last strand and I'm not going to feed it through every single half hitch here of each strand. That was really unnecessary. I'm not sure why I was doing that. But things have definitely changed since then. All I'm doing is I'm taking it through and I'm sliding it underneath the fall loop. I'll show you how I do that. Just threading this needle on to the last strand here, this one. And I'm just going to take this and pull it fairly tightly and slide it up through the fall like this, the fall's loop. And that's it. There we go. I had forgotten to tie a half hitch with that last strand. I've never done that before. So I had to go back and redo it, but that's what it should look like. We have all the 4 strands here, and then that last strand going through. I'm going to retrim the ends of these strands here. And there we go. Now it's time to roll this whip, but before we do so, I'm actually going to bind to this end here and cut off these knots so we can get a nice even roll. Artificial sinew and hockey tape. I'm just going to tie this end off here and cut it off. Also going to add some hockey tape so that when we cut this off, we're not cutting into the strands, or the wraps, that is, of the artificial sinew. I'm just going to go around the perimeter, and now we're removing it. Alright, now that we got that stuff out of the way, let's roll this whip. Alright, I've just rolled this whip using the same rolling methods that I have been using. Nothing's different there. Getting ready to attach the foundation for our heel knot. Alright, for this next segment of this video, I'm not going to be going that slowly because I already have a video on how to create a heel knot foundation with a wrist loop. But I want to mention to you guys the biggest difference, the thing that has changed about this process is that I am no longer using this 10-ounce cowhide for the foundation material, but instead I'm using this stuff. This is called neoprene. And it's a great substitute for leather. It's easier to get. It's cheaper, much cheaper. You can buy, actually, as you can see, I've covered my entire workbench with the stuff. This whole piece here was about $25. But it's about 1/4 of an inch thick. You can get it in various thicknesses, so that's what I'm going to be using for this heel knot foundation. First off, I'm going to braid a flat 4-strand wrist loop. Okay, I have the wrist loop here, and I'm going to attach it to the whip here. Now, I want to make this clear right now. This is something I'm doing extra for Tom. He would like a little larger than normal foundation knot and a wrist loop on this whip. So, I want to make it clear, this is obviously an optional step. The only thing I'm doing differently here with the current nylon bullwhip making method is that I'm using neoprene. So if you don't want to do the wrist loop and the larger heel knot, please follow the instructions from my older current nylon bullwhip making method and just substitute the neoprene in for the leather. Once again, I do have a video tutorial exclusively for attaching a wrist loop. This is just being attached directly to the handle. Really pulling tight here. I'm going to be using staples in the end to hold everything down, but it's very important to get it nice and tight from the beginning. I want to show you guys something I'm doing with this neoprene. I'm taking my snippers like this, and I'm just kind of nipping the corners like this. Just kind of beveling those corners so that when this thing is rolled up and becomes the heel knot foundation, it's just more ideal for the paracord, so there's not such a sharp curve around those knots. I like there to be a little bit of an angle for those strands when I'm tying the knot, so it's a more round knot. So this is what I'm going for here. A nice beveled edge that's going to go in this direction. So the end is going to be fairly flat, but the nose of this heel facing the thong of the whip, it's going to be nice and beveled. And I'll give you guys the diameter here. This is about 30 millimeters wide. Okay, so we have our foundation in place, and here we have another thing that I do differently now with my bullwhips, my nylon bullwhips. And this isn't just for bullwhips that have a wrist loop and an extra large heel knot foundation. This is for all bullwhips. I am using 1/2-inch staples. The nails were just a little excessive. I finally realized that. Make sure I have about 3 of them through the wrist loop area, so that's not going to go anywhere. I'm just going to tap these staples in with a hammer, just so they're all the way in. Some staple guns are a little more forceful, and you won't have to do this. Give us a couple wraps of artificial sinew, and we will be ready to tie our first knot of this whip, the heel knot. Okay, this is ready to go, and once again, for this heel knot, please refer to my wrist loop tying video. Alright, so here is the finished heel knot, and it's time to tie our transition knot. Now I'm going to be showing the entire process here because there is something that I do differently. For my transitions, I no longer am using any foundation other than a generous layer of artificial sinew. And that's just because I like the look of the knot that you get from not having this tall, bulky transition foundation. All I'm doing is finding where I want the transition to be, or where the transition is, that is. Now I can start to build up the middle, just checking the bottom, making sure that it's uniform on all sides there. And that's it. I'm going to cut it, press that sinew into the wraps below, and that is our foundation for our transition knot. We're going to be tying a 2-pass 5x4 knot for our transition. Alright, I have here about a 4.5 foot piece of parachute cord, 650 parachute cord in black, that I have laced into my needle. And I'm going to get the knot started just to the left of our foundation, just the way I've always done it. So I'm going to go over this strand, around the back, over again, under this one, and over that one, around the back again. Going to go under this one, twist this over this one, and under the middle one. And over that one, around the back. We're going to go over this one, under that one. Over this one, under this one, over, under, like that. And over that last one, and then we can start our second pass. Before we continue with the second pass, we're going to take this and just slide it over our foundation of sorts that we built up with our sinew. Now it's important that you don't have this thing very tight to begin with. You don't want these strands scrunched together because we need to make room for our second pass. So to do so, I'm just kind of looking through here, making sure that there is enough room for a second pass without, you know, stretching things out and creating any ugly overlapped areas. So I'm just pulling these strands forward and just kind of neatening the spaces out, distributing the strands evenly. And I think that's good. We're going to go ahead and start our second pass. So whatever the strand does, we're going to mimic it to the right of that strand that we're copying. There's one. Whatever it does, we do. But that's the key. The key is to not be starting the first pass and making it so tight. I used to do that, and by the time I got my second pass halfway finished, it was just a mess. And one of the things that's so nice about waxing a nylon whip is that it tightens your knots. it really tightens your knots. It tightens everything. It took me a long time to realize that there are so many benefits to waxing a nylon whip. You get a little bit of extra weight from the wax. You, of course, waterproof your whip. That's kind of the main reason to do it. Just has so many benefits. If you're having trouble tying this knot, I go a little bit slower. In my transition knot tutorial, it's exclusively for this knot, and the way I do it in there, I do build up a foundation with leather, so you can simply follow the instructions in that video if I'm going too fast for you here. Because this video is meant to just highlight what I'm doing new now, so there's no need to show you every single thing I'm doing because I've already established that in my previous video. So once again, that's to save you guys time. I don't want to show you things you already know unless you want me to. Sometimes it helps to see someone, you know, doing something that you already know how to do. It helps you kind of become more efficient at it. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And here's our final pass. And this knot is done. And look at that. We haven't rolled it yet, but I really prefer the look of a transition knot that doesn't have all, you know, it's not so bulky and big and stacked up like you get with the with using the cowhide. Little snip there, and a snip there. Put that needle away before I lose it. A little melt there to seal it. Press that into place there. And seal the other side. So let me show you a before and after of rolling this knot. So here's obviously unrolled, and here is rolled. It's just a little bit longer, a little more uniform, and it's laying flat. So at this point, it's time to wax this whip, and it'll be finished. I want to thank each and every one of you for stopping by and watching this video. As always, if you like the video, please do subscribe, comment below, like, share with your friends. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.